The other day, scrolling through YouTube hoping to find an interesting enough video to watch, I scrolled down to see something titled The Discovery. Now, I had never heard of this channel, but intrigued enough, I decided to give it a little watch. And by the end of it, I was completely blown away. To give you a basic summary, this guy right here, by the name of Danny, describes how he took the psychoactive drug DMT. After this, he takes a red laser and shines it onto a wall. What he saw, however, left him in astonishment.
When I first saw the phenomenon, it was like, holy shit!
But then it was actually like, whoa, what is happening?
In this light, he sees a series of numbers and Hebrew-like letters. Fascinated by this and curious enough, he had an idea. He decided to ask his friends, without telling them what he saw, to take DMT and report to him what they saw in the red light.
Just for the record, I haven't told him anything. Okay, just tell me what you see.
Oh my God, come on.
Sitting there, eyes glazed and seemingly fixated on the view before them, they reported what they saw. A series of numbers and almost Hebrew-like letters, just as Danny had seen. Now, seeing this video, as I said before, I was completely blown away. I had my own questions about the world, about the whys and the hows and all that fun, existential stuff. But instead of answers, it actually led me to more questions. Like, why would we be seeing a code through a light laser? Why on DMT? Who really runs the show? And most far-fetched of all, are we living in a simulation? I came to some conclusions of my own, some of which I'll share. But before we get to questions like these, I think a more in-depth look at Danny's observations is needed. Now, to give you more in-depth details about how this experiment was conducted, Danny used a 650 nanometer red laser with a diffraction lens. After taking DMT, he projected the laser onto a surface, after which he observed the series of numbers and symbols resembling Hebrew-like letters within the light pattern. Intrigued with what he saw, he then began to invite friends to participate in the experiment as well. Fascinatingly, they reported seeing similar coded symbols in the laser light after consuming DMT. But to ensure the validity of these findings, Danny emphasized the importance of the people involved not being exposed to these symbols beforehand, in order to minimize potential biases. He provided instructions for repeating this experiment, like the 650 nanometer laser with a cross-shaped lens and a battery pack with an on and off switch. This setup allowed others to also conduct this experiment under similar conditions. This experiment was repeated multiple times and has been experienced by hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals who take DMT and observe a structured, repeatable visual experience. Initially, he explains, during an experience, people see vague movements and patterns, but then they begin reporting perceiving the exact same thing. So much so that a group of people in a room can discuss it and point to it as if it were a tangible object.
But then eventually they drop into the space where they just see the same thing. And we can sit in a room. I had 15 people in a room at the same time, talking about it, pointing to it. You can literally talk about it like you talk about a regular object in a room.
So what could this mean? The question now is, what's happening to your brain on DMT? What are the processes involved? Is this a real realm, as some scholars have suggested over the years, or is it just a simple, run-of-the-mill fabrication of the brain? An EEG fMRI study on the DMT-induced altered states of consciousness explored this exact topic in depth. The study found that DMT increases alpha and theta waves in the brain. Alpha waves are often categorized as a relaxed state of mind, like when someone's relaxing with their eyes closed or meditating. It's just a state of general calm alertness. These waves are present during light relaxation and help with creativity, mental clarity, and calm focus. The presence of these waves during a DMT trip makes sense as it encourages active participation of the observer, whereas in deeper states of consciousness, that level of alertness isn't really there. For example, like when you're dreaming. Theta waves, on the other hand, are linked to states of deep relaxation, meditation, creativity, and the transition between wakefulness and sleep. These waves are also often associated with the dream state and other altered states of consciousness, including hypnosis and deep meditative states. Generally, theta waves are present during moments when the mind is deeply relaxed but still a little aware. This increase in theta waves during a DMT experience means the brain is entering a highly relaxed state of awareness, where the usual filtering mechanisms like the default mode network that keep the brain focused on the external world may be dampened. This is a turning inward. Like I previously mentioned, the research also showed that DMT causes disruption to the default mode network, which is usually involved in self-reflection, ego, and the perception of reality. This means that the boundaries between the self and the external world might blur, which allows for the experiences to feel more real or external than just mental fabrications. Interestingly, the researchers also showed that DMT actually leads to the brain becoming more integrated, meaning that areas of the brain related to perception, emotion, and cognition actually become more connected, working together and in sync. So what happens to the brain during a DMT trip? So in summary, the brain becomes more integrated and in sync, reaches deeper into the subconscious depths, and wants to merge with the perceived external environment, often leading to ego dissolution. So that's mainly the scientific and wordy way of explaining what happens to your mind mapped onto a piece of flesh, or in other words, your brain. But what about all that other stuff you see on a DMT trip? You're experiencing the same brainwaves on a DMT trip as you are dreaming. Doesn't that just mean that it means nothing? Just a bunch of random neural firings in your brain? Not exactly. To pivot a little bit, we should examine the connection between the brainwaves and the contents and context of the states to get a better understanding. The DMT hyperspace is something quite unique. Many, when explaining the occurrences of a trip, have trouble formulating the exact images and sensations they saw and felt. As one woman who was taking part in a scientific study into the effects of DMT at the Imperial College Clinical Research Facility in London says, "My eyes were closed, but there was so much going on that it was really hard to focus. The one image I remember was lots of books opening and rainbows shooting out of them. I felt this quiver. The only other time I've had it is when I was giving birth. A feeling that I'm not sure I want to do this, but a sense of no turning back. You're here and you've got to go through with this." There are a few different common themes involved in a DMT experience. These include: first, often there is a breakthrough. Many report a sense of crossing a threshold into another dimension. Often this involves an intense shift in consciousness with the feeling of breaking through a membrane or barrier into an entirely new space. Following this, many people describe the imagery as fractal-like, with hyperdimensional landscapes leading to tunnels or portals that seem to defy the laws of physics. But perhaps most notably, a major component of these experiences are the entities encountered on these DMT trips. It really is interesting to note the similarities between near-death experiences and DMT reports. As I covered in my video on the history of near-death experiences, many of the figures encountered during near-death experiences could be described as archetypal, meaning that it isn't important necessarily what you see, but what the figure represents. And these figures seem to appear as a reflection of the interior state of the individual. Often, when the person starts to feel fearful, their external reality will start to change to match this, creating a rather frightening experience. In a similar vein, psychologist Carl Jung explored dreams extensively in his works like Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Jung believed that the seemingly disjointed and chaotic nature of dreams actually represent universal symbols. These universal symbols appear across all cultures and are deeply embedded in the collective unconscious. Likewise, these entities encountered on these DMT trips are also deeply personal to the person encountering them. Many of these entities encountered, like the widely known jesters, machine elves, mantises or insectoid beings, animal hybrids, plant beings, etc., are all used to convey different archetypes, though they may show up in different forms. Consciousness is far more than random firings in the brain creating weird little images in your mind. Your subconscious is extremely powerful. Every little thing that you repress ends up in the subconscious mind. These subconscious feelings and thoughts all get played out during the dream state, the hypnotic state, the meditative states, psychedelic states, and even NDEs, because guess what? They're all using theta waves. It can be likened to quite literally entering a new world, because it's so different from your waking reality, which is your conscious reality, the one your brain is currently focused on. All the stuff you haven't focused on or left on a back burner gets kicked down and falls deep into the recesses of the unconscious world, or the theta world, you could call it. All these states I mentioned, dream, meditative, hypnotic, psychedelic, NDE, or near-death experience, all have these same things in common. They all use archetypes. In the theta world, there is no material world. Everything is symbolism because everything can change shape to fit the needs of the perceiver. Okay, so we understand the archetypal undertones of these unconscious states. Does this undermine the experiment, or could it suggest alternate realities, possibly? Well, buckle up because we're diving into the quantum world. String theory proposes that the fundamental particles in nature are actually tiny vibrating strings, not point-like objects.
String theory comes along and suggests that inside these particles there is something else. So if I take a little quark and I magnify it, conventional idea says there's nothing inside, but string theory says I'll find a little tiny filament, a little filament of energy, a little string-like filament. And just like the string on a violin, I pluck it and it vibrates, creates a little musical note that I can hear. The little strings in string theory, when they vibrate, they don't produce musical notes, they produce the particles themselves.
According to this theory, these strings are believed to exist in a universe that has more than the 3 dimensions of space, length, width, and height, and 1 dimension of time. In fact, string theory proposes that there are additional hidden dimensions, usually around 10 or 11, that are too small to be seen with current technology. Similarly, a related idea called brain theory also purports the idea that our universe could exist on a brain, a kind of higher dimensional object, within a larger multi-dimensional space. This means there might be many other universes, each with its own set of physical laws. We just can't sense or see these dimensions in our everyday lives. The idea is that we're living in a 3D slice of a higher dimensional reality, but we're unaware of it because our senses are limited to perceiving just a fraction of the total dimensions. This is where DMT and certain studies conducted in 2001 and 2012 come into play. DMT has a rather unique effect on the brain, as described earlier, especially in the way we process sensory input. Some theories point to the idea that DMT could temporarily unlock or bypass the brain's usual filters, allowing us to perceive aspects of reality that go beyond our normal 3D experience. So if we accept that hidden dimensions are real and can't be perceived physically, and all these universal archetypes exist in our subconscious minds, it brings up an interesting question. How can we access these dimensions on DMT? I've always been taught that I'm a separate individual in my own world, disconnected from the experiences of others, trapped in a physical body. But what if these physical boundaries are more fluid than we think? What if awareness isn't limited to the brain? Now we enter non-local consciousness. Non-local consciousness is the idea that consciousness may not be limited to just the brain, but could actually extend beyond space and time. Now, this pushes aside the idea that consciousness is merely the result of neural firings in the brain. Instead, it suggests that consciousness might be connected to a larger universal awareness, rather than the dual nature of the mind we commonly believe. Quantum mechanics, or more particularly quantum entanglement, offers more explanation into this. Quantum entanglement occurs when particles become linked in such a way that a change to one particle instantly affects the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. As Einstein famously put it, this behavior is spooky action at a distance, because it seems to defy the traditional idea that information can only travel at the speed of light. Some scientists, like Roger Penrose, have suggested that quantum processes could play a major role in how consciousness works, possibly linking us to a broader, non-local reality. The idea is that our consciousness might not be confined to the brain, but could be entangled with a larger field of awareness, like how particles are entangled in quantum mechanics. When people take substances like DMT, their brain's usual filters may be bypassed, allowing them to experience a different level of reality. According to research, this could in fact allow access to a deeper interconnected field of consciousness that exists beyond the physical boundaries of the brain. In these altered states, the mind may momentarily connect with this greater universal awareness, catching glimpses into alternate realities or dimensions that are normally beyond our perception. Given the nature of quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected regardless of distance, this gives rise to the possibility that consciousness too could extend beyond our immediate reality, maybe even to other parallel worlds or realms that we don't typically perceive. So what could this mean in regards to alternate realities? First, it could mean that what we experience as reality might not be the whole picture. There could be other dimensions and parallel worlds that we don't normally see. Second, if your consciousness can connect to a larger universal field, like those entangled particles, you could have experiences that make you feel like you're tapping into a different reality, even though it's always been there, just hidden from normal perception. So we understand now the possibility of alternate realities and how it can be unlocked through the mind. But what about the actual simulation theory, the one that so many of us have heard of and is now being given strong credence through Danny's findings? Imagine this for a second. Everything around you, the world, the stars, even yourself, are just part of a giant computer simulation. Sort of like a video game or a virtual world, but much more advanced. It might sound a little too far-fetched, but this might actually be a reality. Well, a virtual reality. James Gates, a theoretical physicist at the University of Maryland, made a really interesting discovery while studying supersymmetry and string theory. This might get a little abstract, so I'm going to try to explain it as simple as I can. While studying the complex mathematical equations that make up supersymmetry and string theory, Gates found something he really wasn't expecting. He discovered that the equations that make up string theory contain computer codes, particularly error-correcting codes related to digital data transmission. Dr. Gates emphasizes that these codes are not just similar to computer code, but are actually a special type of code that ensures accurate data transmission, similar to how data is corrected during internet browsing.
When you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the matrix or not.
Now, these codes are not something typically associated with physics. Error-correcting codes are used in order to ensure that information is transmitted accurately, even when there is noise or interference in the communication channel, like in cell phones or satellite communications. To find codes like these embedded in the fundamental equations of nature raises a really interesting possibility that the structure of our known reality itself could be just a big computer program. Gates' discovery brings forth the idea that the universe might operate in a way similar to a digital simulation, where the code embedded in the fundamental laws of physics is responsible for maintaining the integrity of reality, similar to how error-correcting codes maintain the accuracy of data. Gates himself noted that this discovery raised questions about the nature of reality and the possibility that we might be living in a simulation. So with all these theories and hypotheses connected together, and bringing it back to Danny's discovery, it doesn't really seem that outlandish to suggest he may be onto something. At the time of me working on this video, Vice actually just published an article on this exact same topic, which could push this concept out further to the masses. Hopefully this could bring greater awareness to the topic. Perhaps there is more to the world than we can perceive through the senses. Maybe this is all some big experiment, an immersive video game created just for us. All this stress, the choices to be made, the endless distractions. What if it's all just a big test? A test to see if we can get to the next level. The question now is, who's running it?